I want to start by offering my condolences to the family and friends of Captain Jen Casey, who tragically lost her life in an accident in Kamloops this past weekend, doing what many of us had hoped to see here on the coast. That's Operation Inspiration, a plan by the Snowbirds to come and lift people's spirits at a time when we desperately need that. And to now have to mourn the loss of yet another Nova Scotian in what has been absolutely a terrible year for the people of Nova Scotia is also a very, very sad day for all of us here in British Columbia and indeed across the country. I want to thank the Snowbirds for all they've done over the years. I know my children and my spouse and I always, whenever we get the opportunity, whether it's a good day or a bad day, we try and find a spot to watch the Snowbirds go by here on southern Vancouver Island. And I remember running into a snowbird at the Victoria Airport and telling him how inspired my spouse, the daughter of Dutch immigrants, was by the Snowbirds. And he took his pin off and gave it to me. So I had a birthday present for my spouse, and she'll never forget that, and neither will I. So deep condolences to the family of Jen Casey and all of the Snowbirds and all those that have supported them over the years. I want to move from a sad situation to an equally sad situation, and that is the rise of racism here in British Columbia. It is absolutely unacceptable to see this increase in people taking it out, their concerns, their frustrations, on people of color, people of a different religious perspective, people of a different sexual orientation. Hate has no place in British Columbia. We are a strong and vibrant economy and a strong and vibrant community because of the diversity that is what makes up this great province. I just can't stress enough how it's just no longer acceptable. And I'm grateful to see citizens standing up to racism when they see it. A number of news stories about individuals who said enough is enough and stepped in the way of racist behavior. We need to do that with increasing regularity. I know all members of the legislature and all British Columbians are focused on making sure that love conquers hate and that we can squish racism out of our community once and for all. We are now on day 2 of phase 2 of the restart of the BC economy, and although there have been some bumps along the way, and there will be bumps as we go through the next week or two, I believe we're off to a good start. British Columbians are anxious to get back to whatever normal is going to be in the days and weeks and months ahead. And in order to do that, we all have to be, as Dr. Henry suggests, kind and calm. We need to make sure that we're not trying to force the opening of a business that's not ready to go, and we want to make sure that we're not forcing employees to go into situations that they're not comfortable with. That's why we've been working with WorkSafe BC and the public health officers to make sure that when people are going back to work, they're comfortable, they're safe, and that patrons can also feel that way when they go into a business. I know there's lots of questions. I'll leave it up to you to fill in the gaps on the restart. But on balance, I'm pretty satisfied with how we're underway. We've got a lot of work to do, and there are many sectors that are concerned that they don't quite have the plan right for their success. But we'll keep working on that together, and we'll get a better outcome as a result.
Reminder to reporters on the phone, please press *1 to enter the queue. And unmute your phones. You won't be audible until I call your name. Our first question today is from Richard Zisman.
Premier, I just want to touch on a point that you just made there about people being forced back to work. You know, with the schools coming back on June 1st, there have been some issues that have been emerging, and one of them is from teachers concerned that they are exposing themselves to other people's bubbles. So I want to get your thought on whether you're concerned about the interactions teachers will have with their students and whether those teachers are put into a position where they feel safe. And also, on the flip side of that, we're hearing from parents who are saying their employers are saying, you must come back to work now because schools will be back open and you have somewhere to send your kids. Are you concerned about that element as well, that parents are being told that the schools are now open so they can return to work?
Good questions. I'll start with the the larger expanding the bubble for teachers. We considered all of those issues. Minister Fleming has been working for the past 6 weeks, 8 weeks, on trying to find the right mix of bringing kids back so that we can have a dry run for the start of the new year in September. And we've done that in a way that is voluntary when it comes to parents and children, but also in a way that will meet the needs of teachers, support staff, administrators, and all of those important people that keep our K-12 system operating. I want to assure teachers, I want to assure parents that we would not have opened up schools again in June if we did not believe it was safe to do so. We've worked with public health officials. We've worked with WorkSafe BC, who's in the business of making sure that workers always go to work safe and come home the way they left. These are challenging times. These are times filled with anxiety. But we've tried to reduce that anxiety as much as possible by putting in a plan that will allow for social distancing, physical distancing for teachers and kids, as well as making sure that we're reminding children of how joyous school can be. And it is, again, a voluntary. It is only for the month of June. It will be part-time for K to 5. There'll be a bit more instruction. For 6 to 12, there'll be less instruction. But for those kids that are having challenges with online learning, this is an opportunity to get a little bit of face-to-face instruction so they can maybe capture some of the elements of whatever the section of the curriculum is causing them difficulty. I think this is an appropriate way forward, and I do believe that teachers can feel confident and safe, provided they exercise their judgment in terms of the distancing and how they comport themselves when they go into the classroom. With respect to other employers looking at the K-12 system as a childcare system, that is not what it is. We're developing a childcare network in British Columbia because we desperately need it for our economy to be strong and for all people in BC to participate, men and women. The challenge, of course, is that we are in a different time than we were in January. We had a 10-year plan to implement childcare across British Columbia, and that has been abruptly stopped because of COVID-19. So as we come out of COVID-19, what I see as one of the bright spots is that uniformly across the economy, people understand now and recognize the importance of childcare to a robust economy that includes everybody. So we're going to continue to build our childcare system, but that's not the role and function of K-12 education. Is it a place where your kids can be during the day? Absolutely. But let's not confuse the two. Early childhood educators focus on bringing little ones to a place where they can step into kindergarten and then go through to grade 12. That's what the system is designed to do, and we're going to keep working and building on that going forward. Employers should not be forcing employees to come to work if they're not ready to do so. We've been clear with employers, and as we've talked through the Economic Recovery Task Force, there has been a sense of a cooperation and a hopefulness from both Labour and employers groups, and I'm confident that we'll get through this. The conflict that you're suggesting may be modest rather than a huge problem.
Our next question is from Tanya Fletcher.
Hi, Premier. The Prime Minister says discussions with the provinces are ongoing on what type of stricter measures will be needed once the restrictions at the U.S. border are eased. Is a monitoring tracking device to track movements, something like an electronic bracelet for people returning, something you might want to see being used going forward?
Well, I'm pretty happy with the border efforts that we've got in place today. And that took some time to get to, and it was a collaboration of both the federal government, who has primary responsibility, and provincial government employees who we sent to border crossings and to the Vancouver International Airport to assist in ensuring that everyone coming into British Columbia had a self-isolation plan. That's worked very, very well. I think less than 150 people of the up to 45,000 people who have come into British Columbia since the program was instituted have required a quarantine. They did not have a plan of their own. That's a very, very small number of people who aren't with the program. I don't believe that ankle bracelets or electronic monitoring is the best way forward, but I'll leave those decisions, or at least the advice that she can give to government, to Dr. Henry. We have a contact tracing program in place that's worked very well, and we've used the old telephone and knock on the door proposal to make sure that people are self-isolating, and that's worked very effectively for us on our program so far. What happens after June 22nd, we don't know. I'm just grateful that Canada and the United States have once again put in place restrictions at the border, and we'll keep monitoring that till we get closer to the month ending, and then we'll take another look at it.
Our next question is from Mary Griffin.
Oh, hi, Premier. Thanks very much for taking my call. You addressed the issue of racism in this time of pandemic during your opening remarks. And I'm just wondering about a particular incident up in Parksville where a spa was vandalized. It's operated by Korean Canadians twice within the past week. All the other neighboring businesses not touched at all. Should there be consequences for the apprehended? And just going on to a second topic, also on the issue of businesses reopening, they're finding that their costs have increased substantially due to the procurement of personal protective equipment, and they're passing those costs on to the consumers. Your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Mary, for the question. And it's absolutely reprehensible that a business would be isolated because of the ethnicity acceptable in British Columbia. And if those perpetrators are caught, they can expect the full force of the law to come down upon them. There is no space in British Columbia for that type of behavior. I know, talking to Del Manick, the chief of police here in Victoria, as well as observing the good work of the Vancouver Police Department and the RCMP that I travel with regularly, within the law enforcement community, there is zero tolerance for racism. When you look at the diversity of law enforcement, of fire crews, of our legislature, the diversity of our communities is now being reflected in our public institutions. And there is zero tolerance for this type of behavior in British Columbia. And if these perpetrators are caught, they can expect the full weight of the law to come down upon them. We're working cooperatively, whether it be the Leader of the Opposition offering suggestions of how we can beef up our anti-racism plan, or the Green Party also suggesting ways that they think that we could better work together to speak with one voice on this very, very important issue. I'm the son of an Irish immigrant, and I have not experienced racism, but I am as new to Canada as anyone else. Indigenous peoples have been here for thousands of years. The rest of us came from somewhere else with the hope of a better life for ourselves and our families. That's what's made this country spectacular, and that's the strength of British Columbia. Racism is not on. We got to stamp it out. We all have to do that together.
Next, we have a question from Justine Hunter.
Hi, Premier. You mentioned childcare, and advocates for childcare are calling on your government to fast-track that $10 per day daycare promise as a way to help parents return to the workforce as we reopen the economy. I'm wondering, I didn't hear anything that indicated you were looking at fast-tracking that. Is that on the table?
Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff on the table, Justine, as you know. There's no shortage of ideas that come forward as every day goes by. We've had a cross-government approach to responding to the pandemic. Minister Carol James is toting up the costs and consequences of programs that we're initiating as part of the $5 billion recovery plan, as well as what resources do we need to add to the existing budget to meet the needs of the community in this new world that we're entering into with phase 2 of the restart. And I understand and respect very much the advocacy within the childcare community. It was their advocacy that got us to a place where I was sworn in as Premier of British Columbia with a focus to create more childcare spaces. And I'm not backing away from that for a minute. But I believe accelerating the plan that we already had in place is not likely in the short term. We need to make sure we're educating more early childhood educators. We need to connect, as one of the earlier questions suggested, education to early childhood education. This is one of the calls from advocates for many, many years. It's currently housed within the Ministry of Children and Family Development. We're looking at expanding and moving it into the K-12 system in terms of management and ensuring that we're getting continuity from toddlers right to graduates. And we have a lot of work to do. You can call that acceleration, you can call that status quo. What I know and what I'm excited about is that everyone in British Columbia understands the importance of childcare now that might not have thought that even 2 years ago.
Our next question is from Marcella Bernardo.
Hi, Premier. Thank you so much for taking my question today. You touched a bit about the border control and what's being done to try to mitigate concerns there. I got an email this morning from someone who's saying that it's okay for me to drive across the country to go visit family in Quebec, but not across the border to visit family in Washington State or friends in Washington State, where the death toll isn't as high as it is in Quebec. I guess, how do you respond to something like that?
Well, certainly we have mobility rights in Canada. They're enshrined in the Constitution. We have border restrictions in place to protect Canadians from whether it be trade or virus or any other external forces. That's what border patrols and border security is all about. Dr. Henry and I and Minister Dix talked about how we can relieve some of the stress, because there are many people who do have family connections into Washington State and they want to go and visit their family and they visit their friends. As the summer goes by, as we continue to see positive outcomes with respect to caseloads, hospitalizations, and all of the issues that Dr. Henry raises on a daily basis, we'll be in a better position to revisit this. But it's a very good question. I hear a lot from people in the interior and in border communities like Invermere and in the Peace Country, as well as in Golden and down into Cranbrook. That Alberta and BC have a border that is porous. People go back and forth from both sides on a regular basis. That's part and parcel of our Canadian citizenship, and I don't want to jeopardize that. But I do understand the question, and I appreciate that it might seem incongruous to have the ability to go to Quebec, where the caseloads are very high, the death counts are very high, and not being able to go to Washington State. But that's where we are at today. Dr. Henry sees of this, and she'll have more to say on it in the weeks ahead.
Next, we have Binder Sajan. Go ahead, Binder. Oh, sorry, I put the wrong person in. Next, we have Rob Shaw, in fact. Oh.
Premier, now that people are going back to work at the rephased opening of the economy, where are you in your discussions with the Prime Minister on a national sick pay program? How long are you willing to wait on that? And what's BC's backup plan if you can't get the other premiers and the Prime Minister on board on that? Can we develop our own sick pay program in the province, or is that not on the table?
Well, it's certainly on the table. I'm not ruling out anything. I still believe that this should be a national program with national leadership, because it has national consequences. But we're prepared to go it alone if need be. I do have allies in the federal government who appreciate the initiative that I've been promoting, and we have our regular calls tomorrow morning with premiers across the country, and then with Minister Freeland and the Prime Minister. So I'm going to hold fast to my position today, and we'll see what comes out of tomorrow. But just to help you out there, Rob, we do have alternative plans in place, but I still firmly believe that the federal government needs to be part of this.
Next, we have a question from Ben Kuzma.
Premier, thanks for taking my call this afternoon. You went to great lengths last week to talk about how the province could host an NHL tournament per se should we resume play, and you cited some of the cities in the interior. It's come to my attention today that the NHL is pretty strict in its criteria for the resumption of play. One main arena, one main practice facility, 2 downtown hotels to kind of keep a bubble concept. How well positioned do you think Vancouver still is, Premier, to become a hub city? You spoke very passionately about it last week, even though this criteria seems to be more defined to take away some options that would be viable here or within the province. Where does Vancouver stack up? And I know you've talked before about the rich history here of hosting events. Are we still a go-to city?
Well, I would think we are, Ben. Thanks for the question, and I just want to put some context for those that haven't been following it as closely as you have. I opened up the idea of using Western Hockey League rinks across the province because we do have a rich hockey tradition in every corner of British Columbia, and really superior rinks in places like Kelowna, an AHL rink in Abbotsford, as well as all of the infrastructure that's in the Lower Mainland. But going back to the NHL's now preferred or current position on the hub city, Vancouver again has the main arena that the Canucks played at. We've got the Coliseum, which with a little bit of spit and polish could be brought back to an NHL standard, I believe. And we also have Langley and we have Abbotsford, as I say, that could be refurbished if need be. In terms of hotel capacity in Vancouver, I think that we're very well placed. And again, what I've heard from those who represent players, the view is that if you have to spend a couple of months in one place for the summer, Vancouver would be the place to do it. And that's not belittling any other NHL cities in North America, but I have a bias to Vancouver, and I think most of the people who are going to reading your story will feel the same way. Vancouver's well placed. The Canucks are 100% behind getting the hub concept underway. I opened up another couple of alternatives for the NHL to consider. I'm hopeful that they just consider British Columbia at the end of the day.
And now we have a question from Binder Sajan.
Hi, Premier. Just a question from a colleague about how BC is balancing safety on transit systems with trying to maintain revenues. And for me, just wondering about the legislature, when we could see it resume, and if we can expect to see you in a mask as we saw the Prime Minister today.
Well, I'll certainly be wearing a mask if I can't physical distance, and I encourage all other British Columbians to do the same thing. And I rather expect, if you're hopping on a SkyTrain or catching a bus, whether it be BC Transit bus in Prince George or Victoria or a TransLink bus in the Lower Mainland, you're going to see an increasing number of people that are wearing masks and other PPE as they move around our urban centres. And that's a personal decision. It's one that's now reinforced by the National Public Health Officer, Dr. Tam. Dr. Henry has spoken at length about her view on masks as being a protection to others rather than a protection to yourself, particularly the cloth masks, which seem to be, I've got about a half a dozen of them now, trying to find the right look for me. Binder, maybe you and I can talk about that later on. But I believe that you're going to see an increasing number of British Columbians and Canadians wearing masks primarily to protect other citizens, and that's appropriate. In terms of PPE, broadly speaking, we've been focused, as you know, Minister Dix has kept you up to speed on a daily basis on what the various machinations of making sure that we had sufficient PPE for our acute care system and other healthcare providers. We're in a solid position right now, and we're looking at reverting our hub outward so that we can help the private sector get the equipment that they need, and ensuring, of course, all the while that we're protecting the needs of our frontline workers.
Our next question is from Andrew McLeod.
Yeah, hi, Premier. A few weeks ago, Cabinet appointed a new Deputy Minister of Environment and rescinded the OAC for the old one. I know you can't talk about the personnel piece of it, but I've been hearing concerns about what the firing says about the direction of your government and how green or brown the recovery is likely to be, and I'm hoping you could please comment on that part of it.
Well, certainly the human resource matters are the responsibility of the public service, and my deputy minister oversees broadly speaking, the public service. For the direction of the government, when I announced our restart plan, I made it abundantly clear that the foundation of that plan was Clean BC. We worked very hard with opposition members, Andrew Weaver and others, to make sure that our plan was unassailable in terms of our challenges with respect to climate change. We have a plan in place that is an economic plan. We repeatedly say there's no difference between the economy and the environment. They are the same thing, and we need to make sure as we come out of COVID-19, we're focused on building a clean, green, reduced carbon economy. And that's been our objective since we were sworn in as a government, and that will continue to be our objective going forward. Human resource matters have no bearing on the direction of the government. That's Cabinet makes those decisions, and the Cabinet is virtually the same today as it was in 2017.
Our next question is from Brishti Basu. Brishti, go ahead.
Brishti has left the queue.
Okay. Then we're going to go to a question from Vaughn Palmer.
Good afternoon, Premier. The memorandum of understanding that your government signed with Ottawa and the Wet'suwet'en leaders last week includes a commitment to commence immediately on negotiations to put legal recognition to Wet'suwet'en title and rights. says it should be done within the next 3 months. Have those negotiations begun? Do you think they can be completed by the middle of August? And do you have any commitment that this time the elected leaders will be involved in the process?
Thanks for the question, Vaughn. I believe that the MOU is a great step forward for the Wet'suwet'en people and for British Columbia. You'll know full well, Vaughn, more than most, that when our government was sworn in, I focused in every single mandate letter on ensuring that we implemented various policies that would demonstrate that reconciliation and rights and title were issues that have been resolved in many court rulings, but needed to be now part and parcel of government policy. That was the objective of sitting down with the hereditary leaders to look at the Delgamuukw-Gitsewe decision, which is now 23 years old. How can we implement that here in British Columbia? Nowhere in the document, in the Memorandum of Understanding, is there any diminishment of the roles and responsibility of elected leaders within the Wet'suwet'en territory. But the Wet'suwet'en hereditary leaders brought the Delgamuukw case forward. It's the hereditary leaders for the office of the Wet'suwet'en that have been pushing hard for a recognition of rights and title. In my opinion, I have put on the table for all Wet'suwet'en the tools to find their own self-determination, and that includes all members, whether they're elected or hereditary. And you'll also know that many of the elected chiefs through Wet'suwet'en history have also been hereditary chiefs. So there's not two camps per se. There are just the Wet'suwet'en people, and it's up to them to figure out how they govern themselves. That's in the best interest of the Wet'suwet'en, and I believe it's in the best interest of British Columbia as well.
We only have time for one more question, and it's coming from Keith Baldry.
Hi, Premier. Thanks for this. Just a repeat of Vinder's question about the House coming back. Any date for that and what the House will look like? And also the continuing reference to the schools being a dry run for the fall seems to suggest, and we've got sort of conflicting information on this, that what we're seeing in June will be what we see in September as well in terms of the structure of the classes.
Well, let me start, Keith, with the K-12 question first. We want to do a dry run for teachers, for support staff, for administrators to get a sense of what a physical distancing school will look like. And as you'll know, different parts of the province have different enrollment issues. In Surrey and in Souk, where I live, the enrollment is going up year over year. In other parts of the province, it's flat, or in some cases declining. So each school district, each school for that matter, will have different configurations of how they'll operate in June, and that will inform how we prepare for September. But there will be innovation over the summer as people look at what the outcomes were through June and how we can improve upon that. And that's my expectation. Everyone is on the same page here. There's apprehension, absolutely, among parents, among some teachers, and among some support staff. But there is a common focus on making sure that we can reopen our K-12 system in a way that's safe. And we would not be doing it if we didn't have the approval of the public health officers and WorkSafe BC having a look at what the procedures are going to be to protect those people that work within the system. The other question about what the legislature will look like, it will look unlike what it did even in our one-day session after COVID-19 came to British Columbia. Minister Farnworth has been working with Mary Polak, the opposition House Leader, as well as Sonia Furstenau, the Green House Leader, on what that will look like. You can expect to see us back here either the 15th or 22nd of June. And we'll be focused on getting the budget passed, getting the estimates process completed, and a modest number of pieces of legislation that we believe are required to keep our agenda moving forward. We have Mike Farnworth's worked very hard with his colleagues, Mary and Sonia, to make sure that we're abiding by the principles of physical distancing, which means that the legislature proper will look different for debates. It'll look different for question period. We're going to be using more technology. We're going to be using multiple rooms within the legislature so that we can keep MLAs at a distance. And there will be, I suspect, I'll leave it to Mike to explain most of the details, but we're using a lot of technology that will perhaps allow members, far-flung members, to stay in their community, to be able to actually do their voting by computer at certain times during the day, rather than having all of our votes assembled for the end of the day, so that we can have everybody together and we can pass our yay or nay on whatever our views are on the legislation that's before the House. It's going to be new, it's going to be innovative, and it's going to be a challenge. But the new clerk of the legislature, Kate Ryan-Lloyd, is seized of the task. And for those who have been milling about the legislature periodically, there seems to be an awful lot of television screens going up in places where there never used to be any. I suspect we're going to see lots of Hollywood Squares or Brady Bunch type images of multiple MLAs that are in different parts of the legislature or different parts of the province participating in the dynamics of the democracy of British Columbia. It's going to be an innovative time. It's going to be a challenging time. I think it'll be an exciting time.